Children. The bidding started at $15. Children. Lottie didn't look up. She had learned not to. Looking up meant catching someone's eye, and catching someone's eye meant something worse than whatever was already happening. So she kept her gaze fixed on the floorboards, warped pine, dark with mud and old spills, and listened to the voices haggle over her like she was a lame horse nobody particularly wanted, but somebody might find use for. Children. 15 and not a cent more, said the man who'd dragged her in. His name was Fowler. He smelled like wet leather and something sour underneath, and he had a habit of gripping her wrist when he talked, not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to remind her he could. Children. She had been with Fowler for 11 months. Before that, there'd been a woman named Drusilla, who ran a boarding house in Cheyenne and called the girls her kept charges, children, which sounded almost kind until you understood what it meant. Before Drusilla, there was a wagon and a man whose face Lottie had mostly managed to forget, children. Before that, a long time before that, there had been her mother's kitchen and the smell of sage and a dog named Pepper who slept across the doorway every night. Children. She didn't think about the kitchen much anymore. It hurt in a place she couldn't locate. Children. $15 for a girl who can work, Fowler announced again, louder, to the room at large. The trading post was crowded for a Wednesday. Men in from the range, a few homesteaders, somebody's teenage sons pretending not to stare. A fire popped in the corner hearth. Wind pressed against the shutters. Children. Nobody answered right away. Children. Lottie counted the grain in the floorboard beneath her left boot. 7 lines running parallel, 8 if she counted the narrow one near the knot. Children. I'll give you 12. Children. The voice came from somewhere behind her and to the left. Low. Not the kind of low that was performing itself. Just naturally quiet, the way some men were who'd spent too long alone in places where noise cost you something. Children. Fowler made a sound of disgust. 12. She's worth double that in labor alone. Children. $12, the voice said again. Same volume, not arguing, just repeating. Children. There was a long pause. Lottie heard Fowler shifting his weight. She knew that sound. He was calculating, not whether 12 was fair, but whether he'd find better. She had watched him do this arithmetic before, with a mule, with a saddle, once with a rifle that turned out to be cracked at the stock. Children. Fine, Fowler said. 12, and you're robbing me. Children. Coins landed on the counter. Lottie heard them without counting. Children. Fowler dropped her wrist. Children. For a moment she just stood there, not sure what she was supposed to do with the sudden absence of his grip. Her arm felt strange, light. Children. Come on, then. Children. She turned. The man standing a few feet away was tall in the way that mountains were tall, not aggressive about it, just there. He wore a heavy coat, buffalo-lined, with snow still caught in the collar. Children. His face was weathered and serious, somewhere past 40, with a beard gone mostly to gray and eyes that were. She looked for something in them, children, the thing she'd learned to look for first, but found nothing that alarmed her, which alarmed her in a different way. Children. His name, she would learn in the next few hours, was Virgil Hatch. Children. He didn't explain himself in the trading post. He didn't say where they were going or what he intended. He just held the door open, which no one had done for her in a very long time, and waited. Children. She walked through it. Children. The cold hit her like a flat hand. She had no proper coat. Fowler had taken the wool one in November, said she'd given it to him in trade for something she couldn't now remember. She crossed her arms over her chest and followed Virgil Hatch to a wagon loaded with supplies. Sacks of flour, a crate of salt pork, 2 lengths of chain, a box of ammunition. A mule stood at the hitch, unimpressed by the weather. Children. Virgil climbed up to the bench and clicked his tongue. The mule started moving. Children. Lottie stood in the snow. Children. He looked back over his shoulder. You're going to freeze standing there. Children. She climbed up. Children. They drove for a long time without speaking. The trail climbed steadily north, away from the town into country that got quieter and colder and more itself as the afternoon wore on. Ponderosa pine and open meadow, a frozen creek running parallel to the road, hawks riding thermals over a ridge to the east. Children. Lottie sat with her hands between her knees and watched the landscape move and tried to figure out what was going to be asked of her. This was a skill she had developed over years, reading situations before they read her, anticipating, staying one step ahead of whatever was coming, because one step was sometimes all you got. Children. Virgil Hatch, so far, had not looked at her in any of the ways she'd been looked at before. Children. That meant nothing. It was still early. Children. You hungry? He asked, around the third hour. Children. She considered the question, whether to admit to hunger, what admitting to hunger might cost. Children. I'm fine, she said. Children. He reached under the bench and produced a cloth bundle without looking at her or the road or anything in particular. He set it on the seat between them. She opened it. Cornbread and a thick slice of cured ham, still slightly warm from wherever he'd stowed it. Children. She ate it all. She couldn't help it. She hadn't had a full meal in 4 days. Children. He didn't comment. Children. The cabin appeared at dusk, tucked into a south-facing slope above a small creek. It was nothing impressive. 2 rooms, a covered porch. Children. A stable attached at the north wall, where 2 horses and a second mule watched their arrival with mild curiosity. Wood smoke coming from the chimney, which meant he'd banked a fire before leaving. Children. He'd known he'd be coming back to it. That was something, she thought. A man who thought ahead. Children. Inside, the cabin was spare but not neglected. A bunk built against the wall, a table, 2 chairs, shelves of provisions, traps hung from the rafters, a rifle on pegs above the door, a second blanket folded on the chair nearest the fire, not where he'd left it casually, she noticed. Folded. Children. She stood near the door. Children. The bunk's yours, he said, hanging his coat. Children. She looked at it, then at him. Children. Where do you sleep? Children. I'll sort that out. He didn't elaborate. Children. That night she lay in the bunk and listened to him settle into the chair by the fire, and she did not sleep for a very long time. She watched the rafters. She listened to his breathing slow and deepen. She counted the minutes by the way the fire shifted and popped, and when she was as certain as she could be, she finally let her eyes close. Children. She was still waiting for the other shoe. Children. In the morning he made coffee and set a cup near her without ceremony. He had already been outside. She'd heard him moving in the stable before first light. He ate standing at the counter, looking out the single window at the snow-covered meadow, and when she asked what he wanted her to do, he said, "Nothing today. Rest if you need it." Children. I don't need rest, she said. Children. All right. He rinsed his cup. I'm checking the north trap line. Be back by afternoon. There's wood if you want the fire up. Children. He left. Children. She sat at the table and waited for something to make sense. Children. It didn't, quite. But she swept the floor anyway, because she needed to do something with her hands, and because a clean floor felt like a thing she could control. Children. He came back with 2 marten and a rabbit. He showed her how he stretched and prepared the pelts without being asked, talking through it like he was narrating to himself, not performing instruction. She watched. Her hands learned fast. They always had. By the second pelt, she was helping without him asking. Children. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. Children. 3 days passed this way, then 4, then a week. Children. Lottie was good at waiting for the shape of things to show itself, and slowly the shape of Virgil Hatch was becoming clear. He was a man who lived by routine the way other men lived by company. Children. He rose before light. He worked until dark. He ate plainly and didn't drink, which she marked as significant. He read in the evenings a Bible. Children. A couple of volumes that looked like they'd been read many times before, and he did not fill silence with noise. Children. He never came near the bunk. Children. He never raised his voice. Children. He never looked at her like she owed him anything. Children. She found this profoundly disorienting. Children. One afternoon, near the end of the second week, she burned the biscuits she was trying to make. She'd been doing well with them up to that point, but she'd misjudged the fire and they came out black on the bottom. She stood staring at them and felt something rising in her chest that she couldn't name. Not sadness, exactly. Not anger. More like the pressure of something that had been packed down too long. Children. She heard Virgil come in behind her. Children. She braced. Children. He looked at the biscuits. He picked one up and tapped it on the counter. It made a hollow sound. Children. I've made worse, he said, and set it back down. Children. That was all. Children. She turned toward the fire so he wouldn't see her face. Children. She had never in her life had anyone respond to her mistake with simply nothing. With the kind of nothing that wasn't loaded, wasn't saved for later, wasn't going to be brought back out at the moment it could hurt most. Just, I've made worse, and done. Children. She stood there for a minute, getting herself together, and then she made a second batch, and the second batch was better. Children. Fowler found the cabin on a Thursday. Children. She heard the horse before she saw him. The gait was wrong, slightly arrhythmic, a horse ridden hard and not well cared for. She was outside splitting kindling when the sound came up the trail. She knew without knowing how she knew. Children. She put the axe down carefully and went inside. Children. Virgil was at the table cleaning a rifle. He looked up when she came in, read whatever was in her face, and stood. Children. Fowler came into the clearing like he owned it. He'd brought a man with him, a wide, slow-faced man named Dre, whom Lottie recognized from the trading post and had always avoided on instinct. Fowler dismounted badly and walked up to the porch like the cold didn't bother him, which she knew was an act. Children. Hatch, he called, I've come for what's mine. Children. Virgil opened the door and stood in it. Children. You sold her, he said. That's done. Children. I sold her wrong. Man's got a right to reconsider. Children. He doesn't. Children. Fowler's face changed in the way she'd seen it change before, the way it always changed before something happened. His jaw set. His eyes went flat. Children. She's worth more than $12, and we both know it. I want her back, or I want 40, which is fair compensation. Children. I don't have 40 to give you, Virgil said, and she's not yours to take. Children. The law in this county. Children. The law in this county, Virgil said quietly, is about 2 days' ride from here. So what you've got is what you brought with you, and I'd think carefully about what that amounts to. Children. Fowler looked at Dre. Dre looked at Virgil. Lottie, standing back in the shadow of the room, watched Dre do the calculation she'd seen men do before when the thing they'd agreed to suddenly had actual weight. Children. He stayed in his saddle. Children. Fowler took 2 steps toward the porch. Virgil stepped off it, which put him in the yard and closer to Fowler than Fowler had anticipated. Fowler stopped. Children. There was a long, cold moment where nobody moved. Children. Then Fowler said something under his breath that Lottie couldn't make out from where she was standing, and turned back to his horse and mounted with the same bad grace he'd dismounted with. Children. This isn't settled, he said. Children. Yes, it is, said Virgil. Children. They watched until the horses were gone down the trail. Virgil came back inside. He went back to the table and picked up the rifle and the cleaning cloth and sat down. Children. Lottie stood against the far wall. Children. She had seen men fight over her before. She had seen men hurt over her, and because of her and near her. But she had never seen a man stand in a doorway and be so utterly still and certain that the threat simply left. Children. She didn't know what to do with that. Children. He might come back, she said. Children. He might, Virgil agreed. Children. Aren't you worried? Children. He considered this seriously. I'm prepared, he said. That's different. Children. She thought about that for a long time. Children. It was a few nights after Fowler's visit that she couldn't sleep again, which wasn't unusual, but this time it was different. It was something trying to form itself into words, pressing at the inside of her chest. Children. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind outside and the fire inside and Virgil's even breathing from his chair, and finally, very quietly, she asked, Children. Do you hit with your fist or your hand open? Children. The breathing didn't change for a moment. Children. Then she heard him shift in the chair. Children. Neither, he said. Why? Children. She didn't answer right away. The fire moved. Children. I'm trying to know what to expect, she said. Children. Another silence. Not uncomfortable. Not the kind that meant she'd said something wrong. The kind that meant he was thinking about it with the same seriousness he gave to everything. Children. I've hit men, he said finally, when there was cause and they could hit back. I've never hit a woman or a child. I don't intend to start. Children. People say that, Lottie said. Children. I know. Children. And then things change. Children. I know that too. His voice was steady. I can't make you believe me. I'm not going to try tonight. You just watch. That's all I can offer you. Children. She lay still. Children. The thing pressing at her chest didn't go away exactly, but it shifted, made a little room. Children. All right, she said. Children. She was almost asleep when he said, very quietly, Whatever you're waiting for me to do, I'm not going to do it, Lottie. Children. She didn't answer. Children. But something in her unclenched, very slightly, like a fist that's been closed so long it's forgotten how. Children. Spring came sideways in that country. Not gradually, but in sudden lurches. A warm week followed by a hard freeze followed by 3 days of sun that actually meant something. The creek thawed and flooded briefly and receded. Mud season arrived with the particular misery it always did, turning every path into a negotiation. Children. Lottie learned the trap lines. She learned which trails the deer favored and where the elk watered in the early morning, and how to read weather in the way the clouds moved over the eastern ridge. Children. She learned that Virgil had come to this country from Ohio 10 years back, after a life he referred to only obliquely and only when she asked directly, a wife lost in childbed, children, and the son who went with her, and a farm he'd sold because he couldn't stand to look at it anymore. Children. She understood this without needing it explained further. Children. She told him in return about her mother's kitchen, about Pepper who slept across the doorway, about the day her father's debt came due and what had been offered in settlement. Children. She had never told anyone about the kitchen before. She didn't know why she told him. Children. He listened the way he did everything, fully, without interruption, without filling the space with his own reactions. Children. How old? He asked when she finished. Children. 14. Children. He didn't say anything for a while. The fire popped. Children. I'm sorry, he said. Children. 2 words. But they were addressed to her, to the specific facts of what had happened to her, not to some general condition of the world. She felt the difference, and it undid her slightly, in a way she had to quickly repair. Children. By April she had stopped waking in the night listening for footsteps. By May she had stopped calculating exits. Children. In June she planted a kitchen garden in the south-facing strip behind the cabin. Not because he asked her to, but because she wanted to, which was itself something entirely new. She put in beans and squash and a row of sage that wouldn't yield anything this year, but might, next year, smell like the thing she'd been trying not to remember. Children. Virgil watched her work from the porch, one morning coffee in hand, the particular stillness about him that she'd learned to read as contentment. Children. You don't have to stay, he said. It wasn't an offer of departure, it was just said. Children. She sat back on her heels and looked at the dark-turned earth. Children. I know, she said. Children. She pressed a seed into the ground. Children. I think I might, though. Children. He didn't respond right away. The wind came down off of the ridge and moved through the sage at the edge of the clearing, and somewhere up the mountain a woodpecker was working. That hollow, repeated knock that sounded more patient than almost anything else in the world. Children. All right, said Virgil. Children. That was the whole conversation. Children. That was enough. Children. She learned that summer that she'd been wrong about one thing. She had thought that trust was something that broke and stayed broken, that once you'd learned what the world actually was, you couldn't unknow it, couldn't let yourself rely on the ground underfoot, because the ground had given way before and it would give way again. Children. What she discovered in the slow unfolding of those long mountain days was that trust was less like a structure and more like a muscle. You didn't rebuild it all at once. You tested it in small ways. You left something valuable unguarded. You admitted to being cold. You said, I burned the biscuits without bracing for the response. And every time the disaster didn't come, the muscle got a little stronger. Children. It was never not work. She was never not watching, not entirely. Some part of her suspected she never would be. Children. But the part that watched got smaller. Children. And the part that could, tentatively, reach for a cup of coffee set near her, accept a blanket placed over her shoulders, when she fell asleep in the chair, hear her name said simply, plainly, like it was a name and not a verdict. That part got stronger in proportion. Children. Autumn came, the aspens turned, the trap lines went back in. Children. One morning she woke before he did for the first time, made the coffee, stood at the window in the early gray light, and watched frost patterns on the glass, and felt. She took careful inventory, not nothing, which had been the best she'd managed for a long time. Children. Something. Children. Not happiness quite, or not only that, more like the return of a self she'd given up on. The one that had a name she could stand to hear, the one that could look out a window in the morning and think, this is mine, some of it, this light and this cold and this cup and this day. Children. Virgil came out of the back room pulling his suspenders up, and she turned and said good morning, and he said it back, the same way he always did, like nothing was different. Children. Nothing was different. Children. Everything was different. Children. She handed him a coffee cup, and he took it, and they stood at the window together in the particular silence of two people who have stopped needing to fill it. And outside the frost held for another hour before the sun crested the ridge and burned it away. And somewhere down the mountain the creek ran steady over its stones, patient and cold and entirely itself, going where it was going. Children. There's a moment in this story that I keep coming back to. Not the $12, not Fowler showing up on that porch. It's the question Lottie asked in the dark, do you hit with your fist or your hand open? And the fact that she had to ask it at all. Children. That question didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of learning that kindness had a hidden price, that safety was temporary, that the people who smiled at you were just the ones who hadn't shown you yet. She wasn't broken. She was educated by every person who had ever proven her right. Children. What Virgil understood, maybe without fully knowing he understood it, was that you can't argue someone out of a wound like that. You can't explain your way past it. Children. The only thing that actually works is time plus consistency plus the willingness to keep showing up the same way, day after day, without needing credit for it. That's not a small thing, children. Most people don't have the patience for it. Most people want the gratitude before they've earned the trust. Children. Virgil just kept going out to check the trap lines. He kept setting the coffee near her without ceremony. He kept saying, "I've made worse," and meaning it. And slowly, not because he demanded it, but because he gave her enough space to choose it herself, Lottie started to believe that the floor would hold. Children. That's what I think about when I think about what it actually means to do right by someone. It's not the dramatic moment. It's not the rescue on the porch, though that mattered too, children. It's the 10,000 ordinary moments where you could have been careless and you weren't, where you could have used someone's vulnerability and you didn't. That kind of character doesn't announce itself, children. It just accumulates quietly until the person who needed proof finally has enough of it, children. And Lottie, the part of her story that gets me most, she had to find her own way back to herself. Virgil gave her the conditions. He couldn't do the rest. Nobody can do the rest for you, children. She's the one who picked up the axe and split the kindling. She's the one who planted the sage she might not even be there to harvest. She's the one who, one morning, made the coffee first. That's not a small act, children. That's a person deciding quietly and without fanfare that she has a future worth preparing for, children. That took more strength than anything Virgil did on that porch. Children. What Lottie and Virgil both had in the end was something you can't buy for $12 or any other price. He had the moral steadiness to treat a frightened stranger with basic human dignity when the easier thing would have been to collect what he thought he'd paid for. She had the sheer endurance to stay open to the possibility of safety even after every reason to close had already arrived. Children. The two things together, his decency and her resilience, are what made the story go the way it went. Take either one away and it ends differently. Children. That's not fate. That's cause and effect. That's the quiet, unheroic work of being a person who keeps their word to someone who has no reason yet to believe them. Children. I think we're all at various points on both sides of that.